As I mentioned before the break, this week on Jared Scott Outdoors, I want to show you a couple very unique hunts. Now, we're actually going to venture a little bit outside of Idaho this time. In general, I like to keep things right here close, but, you know, as we're getting out of winter and we're coming into spring, you want to see some new things. Well, we're going to show you something unique just to kind of get you excited about the outdoors and show you something different. Jacob Newman, you've seen him before plenty of times. He's right here local from Frontier Wildlife Studios, taxidermist. He was heading down to New Mexico to follow along with his brother hunting Ibex. Have you ever heard of those? I had neither. And then he's going to go to Texas and hunt aoudad. So a couple very unique animals that most of us here in Idaho have never heard of, definitely have never seen in the wild. And I asked him if he's going to go do these things, go ahead and get some footage for me and bring it back and let me show everybody what these animals are. And I'll tell you what, after looking through this footage, man, they're pretty neat animals, and it really makes me want to go out and have some of these adventures hunting ibex and aoudad. So let me show you some pretty cool animals. Welcome to Jared Scott Outdoors, your source in the field for local outdoor news. As mentioned earlier, we're going to tag along on a couple very unique hunts, ibex and aoudad. The first one we'll start with today is the ibex hunt. Now this is a hunt taking place in New Mexico. My buddy Jacob Newman with Frontier Wildlife Studios, who you've seen several times on the show, headed that way to help his brother Jeremy, who drew the hard-to-get tag. I was curious about it myself, so I asked him to film a bit. After looking at the footage, I'll admit, hunting ibex looks intriguing. They look like an amazing animal in very tough terrain, and hunting these, I found, is no easy task. As you would guess, ibex, technically Persian ibex, are not native. Back in 1970, the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish imported 15 Persian ibex from Iran and released them in the Florida mountains, near Deming. Their numbers quickly grew, and in just a matter of a handful of years, there were controlled hunts being offered. While tags are very limited, there are rifle, muzzleloader, and archery seasons. You'll see shortly why most prefer to hunt with a rifle to have further reach, but it can be done with muzzleloader and archery gear if you want higher odds of drawing a tag. As far as Jeremy goes, he had a muzzleloader tag in his pocket, so this would be a tough hunt in a lot of aspects. As near as I can tell, these mountains in New Mexico are the only place free-ranging ibex exist on our continent, so a pretty rare animal to be able to hunt. That being said, you can imagine how excited Jeremy must have been when he learned that he had drawn an ibex tag. Now, since we're not familiar with these animals, it's hard to tell how big they are. Just so you know, they're actually quite small, probably about the size of a doe antelope. But with just rocks all around them so often, and the billies having these long horns, you get the impression they're much bigger than they really are. As you look at their horns, they look pretty impressive, and they should. I was told that they have the largest horn-to-body ratio of any animal. So starting out on this muzzleloader hunt, Jeremy and Jacob were actually fortunate to spot some ibex early in the morning. As they put up the spotting scope and checked them out, they found several nice billies. As you can see, they were all cliffed up in some pretty extreme country. Still a half mile away, it gave the hunters a chance to try to figure out a game plan. It also gave them time to look over the billies well and discuss the qualities of the better ones they were seeing.
There's one that's bedded down. He's just
right in those trees.
You're right above the tree to the right of the tree. There's two of them that are right there. And those two look to be the biggest. I don't know if I'm catching more shadow
the one that's sitting down, the one that's next to it.
That. His body seems way bigger too. This one that I'm kind of on.
The one that's sitting?
No, he just stood up. And he's a lighter color.
The one that was sitting.
Mm-hmm. That one, of all the ones that are up there, he seems bigger.
Him or the one next to him?
Yeah, but this guy's body looks bigger than the one next to him for some reason.
Eventually, the goats started moving off the cliff face and into some country that Jacob and Jeremy could actually navigate. So once out of sight, they hurried on over to see what they could do to get close enough for a shot. When they came over the rise in the hill, it took a good 15 minutes to spot them because they blended in so well. They did find them, however, and now they were much closer, only 3 to 350 yards. Of course, that doesn't sound too far until you remember that this is a muzzleloader hunt. Still way too far for a shot. From where they were watching, they were kind of stuck. It was wide open between them and the goats with a big draw in the middle. If there were only a few animals, that would be one thing. But there were a couple dozen.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're all really nice. They're all real nice. The front one looked a little bit bigger, but
No way they could sneak in on that many animals out in this wide open desert. They just have to wait them out until they move to another spot, which they did do. Going around them using some draws for cover to sneak in, they tried to get out in front of them. When they did get into the area they expected to find them, all they found was one lone Billy.
well, we found one more. But he's all by himself, so we thought he was going to be big, but he's not. Just kind of smaller. So, still looking. It's about 3:30, and the day's kind of winding down. This other group that we were on this morning came over the ridge, and this is where they came into, but we can't seem to turn them up. This is the only guy we found, so they move so fast in this country. It's amazing, and you can't. It's like trying to hunt antelope in the mountains. You just can't keep up to them, and there's nowhere to hide. So, still looking.
So now they found themselves high up on the desert mountains looking back the way they'd come. They were now coming on the last few hours of the day, and wouldn't you know it, but they spotted a herd going back the way they'd come earlier. It didn't appear to be the same group, but might have been. They tried to get in on them even though they didn't have a lot of time to get to them before they ran out of daylight. This is actually some of the coolest footage I think Jacob got. It also shows just how agile these animals are. They hop around in these cliffs like they don't have a care in the world, while we'd have a hard time navigating them with rope and harness. I mean, look at this guy here on the right. He's in a hole in the rocks, it appears. I don't even know how he got in there. How close are they? Well, 200 to 250 yards, right on the far range of what Jeremy was willing to shoot. However, daylight was nearly gone, it was still the first day, and they now knew right where they'd be tomorrow. So rather than take an iffy shot, they just make sure to be here in the morning. So the next day, knowing that they like to cross that cactusy area after coming out of the cliffs, they made sure to be there. However, as happens all too often, the Ibex chose to go a different route. They were still close, about 250 yards, but just out of range. As you can tell, there were some pretty billies in the mix. All they had to do was close the gap to his muzzleloader range. As you can guess, that's a lot harder done than said, and sure enough, they just stayed out of range no matter what they did.
So the pictures of the Ibex that we had, we're standing right here where Jeremy is last night, peeking down at us. We were down there by one of those trees, one that's kind of on the right, up closest to us, the first one you see. Anyways, they're all over in here all the time. See, this is, they like it. It's not too flat off the backside. I don't know what we'll do if we shoot one in here.
On day 3, they made sure to be up high just inside that cliffy area where the Ibex like to cross. They hiked in the dark and were all set. However, this time, when the sun rose, the Ibex were nowhere to be found. Unfortunately, Jacob only had 3 days to hunt, and so he had to leave his brother at that point and hope that he would be able to fill his tag on his own on another day, which, after a few trips, ended in tag suit. But as you saw, these brothers were in some very cool mountains hunting some beautiful animals together. Hard to put a price on that. So now we're going to switch gears a bit as well as states. We're headed to Texas for an aoudad hunt. Once again, it'll be with Jacob Newman getting us the footage, but this time he'll be hunting. This hunt was actually booked through Trophy Quest Outdoors with Dan Drake right here out of Southeast Idaho, and someone you've seen on the show before. He's an avid hunter. In fact, I bet he hunts more than I do. Over the last several years, he and his partners started Trophy Quest Outdoors, creating some very unique hunting opportunities for those interested. Not only was Jacob going to go hunt aoudad for himself, but as a taxidermist, he was going to help out with the other hunters to make sure their trophies were prepped correctly and ready to go. Given the opportunity to go help on such a unique hunt and hunt himself, Jacob jumped at the chance to hunt aoudad. Alright, so what are aoudad and where do they come from? Technically, a Barbary sheep. They're not native to the States. In fact, they come from the Rocky Mountains of North Africa. Initially, they were brought here for zoos, and they did very well. In fact, there was a lot of private owners that had aoudad. In the end, however, some of those were let loose. On top of that, Texas wildlife officials introduced a few dozen to the state's Palo Duro Canyon, and they took off. They were actually introduced to increase hunting opportunities and give ranchers more income opportunities, which is exactly what happened. These animals were able to survive and reproduce very well in Texas. Now, if you were wondering if this created a controversy, yes it did. And they're still debating on whether or not they should be there because the desert bighorn is having such a difficult time in the state. But regardless of the opinions on whether they should be there or not, hunting exotic animals in Texas on the millions and millions of private acres has saved many ranches who can't survive on cattle alone. It's estimated that hunting exotic animals in Texas is probably close to a $2 billion industry a year. The ironic thing with aoudad is that there are over 75,000 now in North America, while in its native Africa, they're at risk of extinction and only number about 10,000. So now let's get on with the hunt. As I mentioned, Dan Drake and Trophy Quest Outdoors has acquired the rights to hunt on some pretty expansive stretches of land. In fact, this country is so big, many of these animals have likely never seen a human. Now you have to understand, surrounding the 37,000 acres that Dan has available to hunt is literally hundreds of thousands of acres that's not hunted. So you can see why they have so many big free-ranging aoudad here, which of course leads to the chance of tagging some nice rams. They were guiding several hunters over the course of a couple weeks, and as you can see from this photo, they did very well. Everyone had the opportunity to harvest. The animals were obviously there, but don't let that fool you. This is rough country that required boots on the ground for miles in this desert landscape. So on to Jacob's hunt. He got there a couple days before one of the groups of hunters came out, and so he and Dan headed out on their own.
Okay, so we're not on the edge.
It didn't take long to find a group of aoudad that had some big rams in it. They were still about 600 yards off, and Jacob wanted to get closer before pulling the trigger. There were well over a dozen rams in the group scattered around the hillside. Now, if you recall, Jacob's a taxidermist and has mounted several aoudad rams over the years and seen photos of many more that were harvested. What he was amazed with was the quality of these rams. Jacob told me that he was surprised that every one of these rams he was looking at were far better and bigger than any he has seen or mounted previously. This is when Jacob realized that Dan had been able to acquire a special chunk of real estate to guide. The size and remoteness of this land just lends to lots of big animals. So back to the problem at hand, that being these rams just a little out of reach for Jacob. As open as the terrain was, they had to just wait them out until they fed over the hillside. When they did, Dan and Jacob hurried over to find them, but they were nowhere to be seen. They couldn't believe it. This land was wide open and they seemed to have just vanished. So sitting down to take a break in the shade of a tree, Dan suddenly spotted a lone ram down below them. It was in range and a pretty big ram.
376, man.
Jacob got set up while Dan got a range on this big ram.
Just go right up his leg and put it right on his shoulder. I'm ready when you are.
With everything set, it was up to Jacob to take it when ready.
You smacked him. Put another one in. Put another one in. He's just up and to the right a little bit. Get back on that dirt spot. He's just up and to the right a little bit. He's kind of walking away.
Jacob was surprised to find that these critters are tougher than you'd expect. Something the other hunters found out as well. A shot that would have taken a deer down easily wasn't quite as effective on an aoudad, so it took getting on the ram again to put it down for good.
There he lay, right there.
At this point, I guess they were too excited to get video, so we'll stick with some pictures. Needless to say, the hunt turned out great for Jacob, and he then got to stick around and be part of several other hunters' success. In the end, when talking about the hunt, Jacob said, "I don't know if there are many places better for the terrain and the quality of the hunt in these animals. Many think of hunting in Texas as hunting out of a feeder on flat land, and this was nothing like that." He said it was unexpectedly much better than anything he had imagined. In fact, Jacob knew of a few other hunters who went out with other outfitters during the same time who had horrible experiences with very few animals. He wouldn't hesitate at all to recommend booking with Dan, as he said that Trophy Quest Outfitters has something special when it comes to aoudad hunting. Tune in next week